Hi, I'm indie fantasy author Melinda Kucsera, and in this episode of Fantasy, Lore, and More, we've got Royce Roeswood, and he's joining me to talk about his book, Oops, I Broke the Wizard's Android. And I already have so many questions. So welcome, Royce.
Hello.
Tell us about Oops, I Broke the Wizard's Android. First off, why does a wizard have an android?
Well, that's a great question.
Because I thought like magic and technology, like maybe I read too much of what's that? What's that book series? I can't think of it. It's urban fantasy where he can't like technology doesn't work around him because he has magic.
Oh,
it's I can't think of it. Jim Butcher series. I can't.
Oh, yeah.
The name is just I've read so many of the books too, and I'm like,
yeah, Harry
Dresden.
There we go. Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, that's obviously a common trope if there's conflict between magic and AI, or sorry, magic and technology. Yeah. So my book is about a wizard's apprentice named Ninienne Lightcaster, who's kind of on the equivalent of like a year-long unpaid internship. She goes and apprentices under this wizard, but there's technology in the universe. She takes a spaceship to get there. She has the equivalent of like a phone that she can do holographic video chats with anyone. And then, as the events of the novel transpire, it becomes clear that she needs help taking care of this wizard who's alone in this tower and is slowly losing his mind. So they conspire to get an android, but then the android brings its own problems and its own complications. So, and obviously, eventually, she does break. As in the title, it gets broken. So
okay, but so I guess they're like living in a more advanced society if there is like an android out there, because like we don't have androids right now. I mean, I have an Android phone, but it's not actually an android.
No. And some people have gotten confused with that. No, it's an actual like anthropomorphic robotic creature. Yeah. So there's high magic and also high technology, and I do go into some explanations of like in certain situations why magic isn't used, and that's kind of one of the conceits of the book is if there's if there's magic, why do people even bother using spaceships? And the answer is because it's easier and it's cheaper and it's faster. And Ninienne spends her whole year learning portal craft, how to, make portals from one place to another. And, comes to the conclusion of like, this is so much work and so hard and so difficult. It's so much easier just to take a spacecraft. So
that's interesting. So like the sci-fi like elements replaced magic because it's faster, easier, more reproducible. That's interesting.
Right.
It's an interesting way of doing it.
And then there's this, threat, this idea that this android, this new technology, this android's coming in is going to start replacing other people's jobs. And Ninienne thinks, oh, I'm safe because, I can do magic. But then there's, the android slowly encroaches in on the things that she's able to do. And that becomes less and less clear as the novel progresses. So kind of playing into these fears and concerns about AI technology coming in, replacing people, or at least at the very least disrupting the way that people work, even people who felt like their careers were secure.
Yeah. I mean, like that, but disruption is like inevitable, unfortunately.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
Nothing stays the same.
Nope.
Like
Nope.
Before, people were using Photoshop and digital and had cameras in their phones. It was film cameras.
Yep.
And that whole like transition from film to digital happened while I was alive, and I was like not really like aware of it. It was like one day, like you're taking the little what are the
disposable cameras.
That's it. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And then next year, I don't have to do that anymore. I can just get this thing that'll take a picture, and then it got better and better and better. And like, apparently there was a whole war against that. And
oh yeah.
I just wasn't aware of it because I was a kid or a teenager.
No, I am old enough to remember these early conversations about the digital art and, Photoshop art and people being like, that's not art. And, and then, obviously that conversation, moved on because people are, don't even think about it anymore. Even a Photoshopped image or even a purely digitally painted image. I don't think people have any question that it's art and it's creativity. And so.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's just interesting. And who knows, maybe in our lifetime, we'll have people arguing about self-driving cars, that they're not real cars. I mean, it just seems like, yeah, anytime there's some kind of progress, people are like, no.
Mm-hmm. Well, people like to feel like they know what's going on. And if there's something new, that can feel threatening because it's a new thing that they don't understand, and that can make people really uncomfortable. And I get that. But also I think I've gone through enough transitions where I sort of understand, like, hey, like, I understand that things change, and I know how to, kind of keep up with the paces. So
I think it also helps, like, if you're like involved in the world, like working or something, because then the change is happening around you and you're like, okay, we were doing it this way yesterday. I guess now we're doing it this way.
Yeah.
Like, we were talking about before the podcast started, like, I work in IT in a company, and we had a whole meeting. Everybody had to write, documentation. There's all this moaning and groaning until one developer's like, why don't we just ask ChatGPT to do it?
Yeah.
And then everybody's like, oh yeah, we can get this done in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't take them 10 minutes. It took them several days, but it just made them less resistant to the task.
Right. It took the parts of the task that were harder or challenging and simplified it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because these are technical people who are like, they write code. They don't like stringing words together to explain the code. They're like, I will tell you how it works. You can explain to other people. It's usually how it goes. Yeah. But all right, so shall we go to an excerpt, or do you want to say anything else about the book before we do that?
The only thing I want to say is that this is the first chapter of the audiobook, and I do narrate the audiobook. I am a trained actor. That's my background before I got into self-publishing. So this is me, and this is the actual audiobook preview.
Cool. And so since it is a pre-recorded audio segment, I don't know what it's about. So you listeners are going to know what's in the excerpt, and I won't know until in post-production when I put everything together. So get ready for a wild ride as you know more about characters than I do. So, all right, so we'll do the excerpt now.
Chapter 1. Shattering. This orange gas giant on the very edge of the 12,000 worlds has the unusual property of reflecting the light and heat from its distant sun, bringing life to its 2 moons that would otherwise be uninhabitable. The first of these moons, the brilliant moon, is a world of sparkling blue oceans and thin, ribbon-like islands of sand and green vegetation. The second, the shadow moon, is a black rock wrapped in deep purple forests and is almost imperceptible against the darkness of space. What the settlers of Shattering lacked in imagination, they made up for in clarity. It is unlikely that even the most far-flung traveler will find themselves near Shattering, but should you be nearby during the Brilliant Moon's annual festival, it may be worth stopping over to view the quaint tradition. Shuttles run from Mage's Market twice weekly. There is no reason to visit the Shadow Moon. From Pipler's Travel Guides, The New Colonies. When Ninienne Lightcaster saw the brilliant moon of Shattering for the first time from the window of the transit shuttle, she thought it was her destination. She was wrong. In her defense, her apprenticeship assignment had only arrived the previous morning, and she had hastily packed up her dormitory at the Belcaran Academy of Wizardry instead of diligently researching as usual. Now, after several shuttle transfers over nearly 2 days, in the deep void of space without a connection to the data stream, her mind could only spin wild fantasies about what the final year of her magical education would entail. And spin wild fantasies she did. With an ink wand in one hand and a light spell in the other, she put the finishing touches on a sketch as Gossamer nuzzled in her lap. He scratched behind his neck with his furry, webbed foot and licked one of his large, watery eyes with his long tongue. Ninienne had drawn herself and her familiar in a series of imagined scenes, strolling down a cobblestone street lined with inviting shops, on a boat sailing between tropical islands, cooking delicious meals in a garden full of exotic fruits and vegetables. Even though she had already memorized the words, she tapped her data stream device to read her apprentice assignment once again. Glowing text floated in the air in front of her. Mentor, Salagrix, Master Wizard of the Shadow Moon of Shadron. The shuttle banked around the orange gas giant, and Ninienne looked out of the window just in time to see the brilliant moon in its full glory, like a sapphire marble streaked with gold-lined emerald. Is that it? Is that the Shadow Moon? She asked herself, barely able to contain her excitement. She danced a little dance in her seat. A cough from the other side of the shuttle told her that the only other passenger had finally awoken. She smoothed her brown overalls and tucked a strand of long black hair underneath her floppy brown wizard's hat, hoping the old man hadn't seen her dance.
"You headed to the brilliant moon?"
asked a cracked, tired voice. The old man leaned across the aisle, his dusty jacket patched on the shoulders and his mouth missing a tooth. "No, the Shadow Moon, actually. Is that it?" Ninienne gestured to the jewel of a world outside the shuttle window. The old man laughed through a wheeze.
"Afraid not. That's the brilliant moon. That," he pointed, "is the Shadow Moon."
Ninienne looked but saw nothing. "I don't see it."
"That patch there where there's no stars. That sort of nothingness over there."
"Oh," said Ninienne. She still hadn't seen it.
"I figured by the look of you, you were heading to the brilliant moon, and we'd have to make an extra stop. Not many visitors to Shadron in the first place, but nobody visits the Shadow Moon. You got family there?"
"No, I'm doing my wizard's apprenticeship with Master Salagrix. Do you know anything about him?" The old man snorted with disdain, and then looked at Ninienne with disgusted pity before shaking his head and turning away. It took a few moments for Ninienne to realize that the conversation was over. What had she said? She turned back to the window, unsure how to revive the conversation after such an abrupt end, and resumed her search for the Shadow Moon. Beyond the thick plexiglass, the patch of darkness grew. Ninienne's visions of tropical islands and cobblestone streets rapidly unraveled the closer they got. Gossamer, sensing her disappointment, made a soft crooning sound, and she absent-mindedly stroked her familiar's smooth green back for comfort. She couldn't tell if the sinking feeling in her stomach was from the shuttle descending or from creeping dread. After landing, the old man debarked without acknowledging or even looking at Ninienne. Too excited about her apprenticeship to let the rude welcome bother her, she grabbed her satchel and stepped out of the shuttle, Gossamer hopping happily behind her. She found herself in a single-pad spaceport, that word spaceport giving a sense of grandeur to what was nothing more than a stonecrete slab with a few worn benches and a battered sign that read, Black Gulch. The pilot unloaded a few crates off of the shuttle with the help of one of those new androids, and the old man stopped to greet her.
"Where's Chaco?" he asked.
The pilot stuck her thumb at the android. Shuttlecom replaced co-pilots with androids in all minor routes, and I'll probably be next, she laughed grimly. The old man tisked and shook his head.
Shame.
Good thing there's nothing coming after my career, thought Ninienne. Machines can't do magic. Ninienne passed under the gnarled wrought iron gate to discover a black dirt road lined with dilapidated structures, many boarded up. At the other end of the road sat a squat, official-looking brick building, and she headed in that direction. This was, apparently, the only road in Black Gulch. As she peeked down the wide alleys between buildings where little vortexes of dirt swirled, she saw no evidence of more structures. The street was empty, except for one tired-looking crow horse tied up outside the saloon about halfway down, who cawed menacingly and stamped her claw hooves as Ninienne passed. A loose shutter banged in the wind. The air was dry and tasted of that bitter black dust that seemed to be everywhere. An old, hunched woman in a threadbare headscarf appeared from an alley to cross the street, and Ninienne dashed up to her. "Hi," she said. The old woman blinked and clutched her basket. "I'm looking for Master Salagrix. Do you know where I should head?" The old woman made a face as if she had just bitten into something sour, and pointed a long, wrinkled finger to the horizon. There, in the far distance, rising above a forest of dark purple trees, was a jagged black scar against the sky. A wizard's tower. Ninienne turned to thank the old woman, but she had already hurried away. 2 hours later, as the orange gas giant dipped below the horizon, Ninienne reached the end of the trail. The tower stood in the middle of a perfectly circular clearing in the forest, as if even the trees were trying to keep their distance. It looked like a hastily stacked pile of black blocks, each level not quite lined up with the previous. One level, about halfway up, much larger than its lower neighbor, jutted out at a jaunty angle. At the top, a telescope drooped from the conical roof. Gossamer had given up on the hike almost immediately and was still under Ninienne's arm, panting exaggeratedly as she crossed the clearing to the tower's entrance. After the inviting closeness of the forest, being out in the open felt vulnerable. Her feet crunched on brown grass and dry clover. Beside the front door hung a withered wooden ring at the end of a frayed rope. Ninienne pulled the ring, and a gong rang out high above her. Bits of black stone and gray mortar shook loose and fell to the ground, like diseased dandruff from a single enormous nasty hair. This had to be the place. After her encounter with the old woman, she had asked several other sunken-eyed locals to make sure. Each had pointed a sullen finger toward the unmistakable black shape on the horizon, crooked and dark like a charred stick, the only landmark visible from Black Gulch. One hand clutched the strap of her bag closer for comfort, while the other gave Gossamer a reassuring stroke. He croaked sleepily and yawned. "This has to be it, right?" Ninienne asked, not sure whether she was trying to convince her familiar or herself. "It's not like there are any other wizards' towers around here. If this isn't Salagrix's tower, someone owes me a very detailed explanation." She pulled the bell rope a second time, and the banging of the distant gong once again threatened the stability of the tower. More bits of crumbling stone fell in a growing ring. Just when she was about to circle the tower and look for another entrance, a series of latches and bolts jangled from inside. The thick wooden door slowly creaked open. A face peered out from the darkness, so wrinkled and saggy it looked like it had been run through the wash. From underneath thin, drooping, white eyebrows, 2 small black eyes blinked out at Ninienne. The barest hint of a mouth peeked out from the tangled white beard, like a shy mouse. Is it you?" came a voice, dry and feeble as a weak desert breeze. Ninienne thought that was a disconcerting way to greet someone, but so far everything about this moon had been disconcerting. "Yes, it's me, Ninienne Lightcaster. Are you Master Salagrix? I'm your new apprentice." The eyes narrowed and blinked. Complex calculations appeared to be taking place on the other side of his age-spotted brow. Oh. Were those noises of recognition or suspicion? The hunched figure closed his eyes and shook his head. No, it can't be. I already have an apprentice. Redondo, he called back into the darkness. Redondo, get down here. Ninienne's heart sank. Of course, just her luck. She would shuttle all the way to the edge of known space to be sent home on a clerical error. But if it was true, if this wizard already had an apprentice, then she might get to spend her actual apprenticeship somewhere else, anywhere else than the shadow moon of Shadron. Where is that boy? The wizard growled. Whatever haze of confusion had hung about the old wizard's head seemed to clear. His words sharpened, and his eyes focused. He snorted. Probably off trying to seduce the dryad again. She better teach him a lesson. Ha! That would be quite the itch, wouldn't it? Serves him right. You best come in while we wait for that sluggard, and then we can get this all sorted out. But you are Salagrix? Ninienne asked. I am he. The door opened fully, and Ninienne beheld the master wizard for the first time. The rest of his body had fared no better than his face. Long sheaves of skin hung down from his forearms, which, because of his considerable hunch, reached down to his knees, which were hanging down near his ankles. He looked as though he were being held together by string, and, like the surrounding tower, could collapse at any minute. His gray cloak and wizard hat, stained and singed in several places like well-used potholders, smelled of sulfur and ozone. Little motes of dust orbited him like tiny moons, and there was an unusual dampness about him, as if he had just stepped out of the bath. He motioned for Ninienne to enter, and tottered up the stairs. She followed him. There was a spoon stuck to his back.
"It's unfortunate that you had to come all this way," muttered Salagrix as they ascended. "The Shadow Moon is not exactly a tropical tourist hub, as you may have deduced on your way in. I'll give you a cup of tea in exchange for the latest gossip from Belcarin. Then your trip won't go to waste. Ha!" He laughed darkly at a joke that Ninienne must have missed. The stairway was dark, with torches lit by Fandulf's fire charm, but the spells had not been recharged in quite some time, and their light was dull and weak. The acrid scent of the magic flames mixed with the dank must. In her opinion, a lantern light spell was the preferable option for a closed interior, but not everyone had the insight she had as the daughter of the head of a lamplighters guild. Gossamer whimpered and looked up at Ninienne with worried eyes, and she gave him a pat on the head. Ninienne followed Salagrix into the room on the first landing. A bored glowworm gave off greenish light from a cage on the ceiling, barely illuminating the room. 2 sagging couches flanked a low wooden table, crisscrossed with scars and burn marks. A suit of armor, slouched against its sword like a walking stick, observed the proceedings from the curved wall. Next to it, barely visible amid the black stones in the shadows, was an empty, stone-lined niche. "Tea!" Salagrix shouted into the niche so loudly that Ninienne jumped. She squeezed Gossamer and he croak-barked. Salagrix looked at the frog dog as if noticing him for the first time, and then faced Ninienne. "I apologize for shouting, but our kitchen demon is a little hard of hearing." He sat on one couch, which, since his rear was already so low to the floor, took almost no effort at all. This was good because, based on his gasps for air, the climb up the stairs had apparently wiped him out, and any additional effort was certain to kill him. "So," Salagrix clasped his hands together and wet his lips with a tongue that was surprisingly thin, "tell me what old Pageran is up to." Still holding Gossamer, and her satchel still over her shoulder, Ninienne backed down into the opposite couch. "I'm sorry, I don't know anyone by that name. Are they a professor?" "Before your time, then," Salagrix sighed, but it was more like a wheeze. "How long has it been? Must have retired. Pity. What I wouldn't do to give him another round of the old Salagrix smack." He swiped the air at an imaginary opponent. With a sound like a cracking whip and a flourish of crimson smoke, a full tea tray appeared in the niche. Ninienne jumped again, and Gossamer yelped. Salagrix groaned. "I'm sorry, this old man has just sat down. Would you mind fetching the tea for us?" Ninienne glanced at the tea tray in the niche and then back at Salagrix. He was so low on the couch that it seemed it would be a struggle for him to even lift his arms, let alone walk across the room. Leaving her familiar and bag, she fetched the heavy wooden tray, loaded with a full white porcelain tea set and little gray cakes. She poured orange-tinted tea for the 2 of them, and the swirling steam carried the scent of a sharp spice she could not identify. "Thank you," said Salagrix as he took his saucer and she returned to her seat. "How about Ginnerette? Oh, now there was a firecracker. If I hadn't married Eldrathia, I might have, But his train of thought had departed for a farther star. In the silence, Ninienne sipped her tea, which was a comfort in the cold, damp room. The unfamiliar spice was warm and tangy and made her think of red flowers. The cake, however, was grainy and bitter, a subtle reminder that she was still, for a brief duration, in one of the odder circles of hell. She gave the cakes to Gossamer, who tested them gingerly with his long, sticky tongue, and made a disgusted face. Salagrix noticed this and chuckled. "I see you have the same palate as me." He reached out to scratch Gossamer on the neck. "The cooking around here has taken quite the nosedive in recent years. Redondo needs to give the demon a talking to. Where is that layabout?" Salagrix turned to the stairwell, but realized he was still scratching the frog dog's neck. "Ah, and what's this one's name, then?" "Gossamer," Ninienne smiled, glad that the conversation had turned to a topic to which she could contribute. "Gossie for short. He's half frog dog and half something else, I'm not sure what. I found him in the swamp near my hometown, and he's been my familiar ever since." "Shame you won't be staying," Salagrix said to Gossamer. "The tower could use a little cheer." This last word landed in the room with a dull thud. Salagrix's hand dropped, and his eyes drifted to the wall. In the silence, Ninienne tapped her thighs with her fingertips and adjusted her wizard's hat.
The suit of armor was directly in her line of vision. She was no expert on armaments, but the design was strange, with lots of swoops and spikes. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from behind the visor. When it became clear that Salagrix might never return from his distraction, and that Redondo was nowhere within earshot, Ninienne said, "I'm going to call the Academy." "Call?" Salagrix cleared his throat, a sound which Ninienne desperately hoped she would never have to hear again. Yes, of course. Oh, but I think I'm out of hawk powder." "I meant call in the data stream." Ninienne pulled the flat black glass device out of her satchel and gave it a couple of swipes. "Assuming we can get a connection out here." Salagrix looked over at the device as if it were going to bite him or had just insulted his mother, or both. "What is that?" he spat. "Some sort of crystal?" "No, it's technological. The whole academy runs on them. They switched over a couple years ago. Did they not send you one?" Salagrix shrugged. "My connection to Belkarin is tenuous." Ninienne first checked that it was daytime on Belkarin. When communicating across worlds with different suns and rotations, the hardest part was finding a time when everyone was awake. Fortunately, it was currently office hours on Belkarin, and within moments, Ninienne had a live video connection with Dean Falchbrook's assistant. She set the device on the table, and a projected image appeared, hovering in space and refreshing inconsistently in discolored blocks because of the poor connection. The assistant, as best they could tell through the interference, was a tall woman with an elegant face and a tight, neat bun of dark hair. Her shoulders, just above where the image cut off, bore crisp white robes. "Dean Falchbrook's office," said the assistant, in a tone that was clipped and brief, but not unkind. Yes, hi," Ninienne started in. "I think there's been a mistake with my apprenticeship assignment, and I just want to check so I can get reassigned to the right place." The assistant tapped and swiped on something out of sight. "I see that your device is registered to Ninienne Lightcaster. Is that you?" the assistant asked. "Yes," said Ninienne. While the assistant examined her files, Salagrix shuffled, grunting, to peer over Ninienne's shoulder. "Fascinating," he said, and Ninienne could smell the damp reek of his mouth. "How does it work? Is it runes or a glyph of some kind?" "No, it's technology, like I said." Ninienne shifted away from the wizard's breath. "Siliconium, I think." "All right," said the assistant. "I have here that you are assigned to Master Salagrix." "Yes," said Ninienne. "Can she hear me?" Salagrix asked. Ninienne nodded reluctantly. "Salagrix the Sanguine," the wizard announced. His eager eyes flashed in the bright glow of the projection. "Master Wizard of the Shadow Moon of Shadron, 26th Chamber of the Arcana, Initiate of Ulmarth, the Yes, I have your file," the assistant muttered, somewhat irritated. "What seems to be the problem?" "He says he already has an apprentice," said Ninienne. "So if that's the case, if I could just get a reassignment—" "I'm not seeing any other apprentices assigned to Master Salagrix at the moment," said the assistant.
"Redondo!" shouted Salagrix. "I wish to submit a request for discipline for Redondo. Nothing too harsh, mind you, just enough to get him back on track, a bed of nails, that sort of thing."
"Corporal discipline is no longer allowed under the Academy's Code of Conduct." The assistant pursed her lips and made a bemused sound. "Although I see a record here of your previous apprentice, Redondo Vecchi, but it's from, 20 years ago or so." Salagrix made a stifled gurgling noise at the back of his throat.
20 years?
Ninienne was confused. Salagrix had shouted for Redondo as if he expected him to show up at any moment, but Redondo hadn't been his apprentice for over 2 decades. Could the old man be that senile? "So it appears that everything is in order." The assistant sounded pleased, as if disorder was the worst threat imaginable. "Miss Lightcaster's assignment is correct." The pit in Ninienne's stomach doubled in weight and dropped through the floor. She was in the right place. She would spend the final year of her magical education here, in this crumbling tower, with this crumbling man. The projection on her device snapped off, and the room returned to darkness, lit only by the weak greenish light of the glowworm. Salagrix was still staring at the space where the projection had been, lost in thought, as was his habit, apparently. Ninienne stewed in her disappointment. She had been hoping for a more prestigious, capable, engaging mentor, one who would take her under their wing and launch her into her new career. Salagrix turned slowly to face Ninienne. "You are my new apprentice?" He sounded the words as if trying to express a new, complex thought. Ninienne gulped. "Yep, looks like it." An expression flashed across the wizard's wrinkled face, too quickly for Ninienne to decipher. Was it confusion? Fear? An awkward silence hung in the room. Gossamer yawned. "Yes," said Salagrix, drawing out the word. "This is good. It will take time to get you up to speed, of course. Too late to get started tonight, though." He rubbed his hands together and then pointed to the niche in the wall. "In the meantime, you are welcome to order whatever you like from the kitchen demon, but please return the dishes to the niche before you go to bed. I've already had my dinner and I'm going to retire. The apprentice's room is on the second level, just above this one. Make yourself comfortable." With a sound that might have been a groan or the scraping of bone on bone, Salagrix dragged his body up the staircase and out of sight. Ninien's stomach churned. Her body felt heavy underneath the light of the sick-looking glowworm. This was it. They had assigned her to this ancient, befuddled relic of a wizard, and he to her. It had seemed so surreal when the assistant had announced it, and now here she was, in this dark, windowless tower that might collapse at any moment, alone. She shivered against the clammy chill. Ninienne shared a look with Gossamer, who gave a plaintive croak and blinked his watery, wide-set eyes. She was feeling many things, but despite Salagrix's departing word, not a one of them was comfortable.
All right, that was.
There it was.
I hope that was awesome for other people. Future Melinda will know what you just heard because she will have heard it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the. You said her name. How did you pronounce the name? Ninienne.
Ninienne. Yes.
Ninienne. Okay, that's what I thought from seeing it written out.
Yeah.
So, okay, this is hard because I haven't heard that. So I guess let's talk about Ninienne's world. Like, yeah, like the magic and the tech together.
I will talk about it. So this book takes place almost entirely on a moon called the Shadow Moon, and the gas giant that it orbits is called Shattering. And this is a place that's way, way far on the edge of civilized, inhabited human space. It's basically nowhere. It's very rural. She flies into a town called Black Gulch. It seems to be run down. There's not a lot of people there. And she asks around, hey, where's this wizard's tower? People, seem to be afraid of this wizard. The tower is way outside of town. So not only is she out in the middle of nowhere, she's several hours from the nearest town. So it's very remote. It's very lonely. It's dark. It's cold. And to make everything worse, there's another moon right nearby that she can see in the sky called the Brilliant Moon, where everything is apparently much nicer. And she can see it right from her window. So
how did she end up apprenticing to this wizard? Like, does he know she's coming? Did they just randomly assign her? Like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you get this one.
So both. So she is a student at the Belcarin Academy of Wizardry. So she's studying to be a full wizard. And as part of this, and if you want to, in your final year, you can go do this apprenticeship. And you get assigned to a master wizard. And they try to match up, with your discipline, so you're studying something that you're already interested in, but this doesn't always happen. And so that's a question, or it's an early question that she has, is like, oh, are we gonna match up? Spoiler, they don't match up. And then the question is, does he know she's coming? He should have known that she was coming, but he, for reasons that become clear as the novel progresses, has a sort of a loose grasp on reality, and was not aware that she was coming. In fact, still believes that his previous apprentice, Rodondo, is still there. And in the conversation that you didn't hear in the first chapter, it's revealed that Rodondo was his apprentice 20 years ago. So his memory is not up to date. And So not only is he not expecting her, the question is then, what happened to this previous apprentice, and why is his stuff still there? And so that's one of the early mysteries of the novel.
Okay, that's wow. Now I'm future Melinda will have heard that. She will know exactly what's going on.
The other part is I'm trying to remember all the stuff that happens in the first chapter and what is revealed later. So some of that you will have heard, and some of that probably you won't have. So
okay, so all right, so she's in this. So the tower is it's near the village, or it's pretty far
it's like
from the village.
It's a 2-hour hike. It says.
Okay, so she can go into the village if she wants human contact, but it's not going to be easy.
It's hard, and then also there's this sort of this threat of there's like creatures in the woods, and it might be a dangerous hike. And so, yeah, she spends she spends several months in the tower before she ends up getting back into town.
Okay.
Yeah. So she has like almost no contact with the outside world.
Now, your blurb says she's got a familiar. Did
Yes.
that come with her? Or did she make friends with the familiar on location?
No, the familiar has come in with her. She has a frog dog named Gossamer, who's it's not clearly established, but has been her familiar for at least some time.
Okay.
And so, yeah, he's, as she says in the book, he's half frog dog and half something else, as if being half frog and half dog was not enough.
I can't picture that. How do which half is which?
I imagine, and like I put little hints in the novel, but I imagine he's mostly a frog that acts like a dog. So he's mostly frog, like he's got smooth skin, but he's got some fur and he's got a long tongue, but he's like always like climbing up in her lap and like eating stuff and like getting into trouble and like taking naps. And they did the artist who did the cover did like I don't know if I'm gonna be able to show it, but it's got like a little guy here. Might look like that. I don't know.
Okay, so it's a frog with like sort of
a dog's head, maybe.
Yeah, but it's green.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. Does it talk, or is it just a dog?
It does not talk. But and it's established in the novel that if you have a familiar and you have a strong connection with it, it will get you like an extra power, basically. And her connection with her familiar allows her to hear the thoughts of other creatures. And Ninienne is studying to be a creature healer, basically a magical veterinarian. So this is really helpful. So as she encounters creatures that need her help, she's able to get a little bit more insight about what's going on inside and ask and talk to them and communicate with them to varying degrees, depending on the intelligence of the creature.
Okay.
Yeah.
How are there magical creatures? Was there some thing in the past that magic went nuts and caused it, or
it's partly that there's a chapter. So the other thing that I should say is at the beginning of every chapter there's like an excerpt from like an in-world text, so like a book, or like an excerpt from like what's the equivalent of like a podcast, or there's like notes and fragments, letters, diaries, and in one of those it goes into like a very detailed explanation of like one particular creature and how it came to be. And it's like this very complex of like, well, there was this wizard's apprentice who was like took a nap on a spell book, and the spell book activated a glyph, and that created like these nanobots, and the nanobots merged together and formed this skeleton, and then like this creature like formed around the skeleton. So it's this mix of sci-fi and like most of the book, right? It's this mix of sci-fi and fantasy. So there are creatures that are obviously the product of genetic manipulation. There are creatures that are the product of like wizardly experimentation. And then, of course, there's been this colonization process. So there's been all these separate worlds, separate evolutionary lines that have been crossed. So it's basically, I did that in such a way and that basically anything can happen. And then on top of that, there are creatures that are just inherently magical. There are dragons, and there are, other creatures like that. So.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a whole smorgasbord. It's basically, anything goes.
So how does the magic system work in this book, or does
Yeah.
it work? Because if they're turning to technology, clearly something must be wrong with it.
Yeah. So no, I describe it's pretty simple. Wizards and people have a capacity for what's called soul fire, and some people have more capacity than others. And so if you have a sufficient enough capacity, you can use this soul fire. It drains to do particular spells, and so a lot of the book is Ninienne feeling very tired because she's using magic all the time to clean the tower as part of her apprenticeship. But it regenerates with rest and food. But some people don't have enough, and this becomes I don't go too into it in this book, but it is hinted at in some of the fragments, that the wizard academies are purposefully suppressing the study of ways to increase one's soul fire so that the people who already have it can keep it, and the people who don't have it are not going to be able to gain access to magic. So this is that's a little thing that's kind of hinted at kind of in the background that's going to be explored in future books.
And is that why some people turn towards technology, because they don't have that?
Some people don't have magic. Yeah.
Is it like the minority of people who have who have soul fire, or is it like most people do and people who don't is the minority?
I don't go into that, and I hadn't thought about it too deeply. We meet other characters. Obviously Ninien's sort of enmeshed in this magical world. Like, she's gone to this magical academy. She knows a bunch of people. Her mother and father are both have magical capacity. But then, the people that she meets on the moon kind of don't. So I haven't explicitly decided this in the world. This is some kind of an open question. But if I had to guess, I would say that it's probably a smaller minority that is then, using their magic to maintain the hierarchy. And it's made very clear that wizards kind of run the show. Like, there are these master wizards. They are given what's kind of the equivalent of like a governorship. So like every planet has its own, every moon has its own master wizard who's supposed to be in charge. And that's also part of the conflict of the book is Ninien's master, this wizard, is supposed to be in charge of this moon and sort of like taking responsibility for it. And he is not doing that. And so the moon is kind of falling apart.
Yeah.
So
the technology. So, all right. So it started out with magic, and so when they colonized all these other worlds, they used magic to get from place to place and to fix the climate if it's not, good for humans.
Presumably, yes.
And then technology grew out as a disruption. Is that like a more recent thing to technology, or has it been around for a while?
The timeline isn't clear in my head. I do specify that spaceships at least have been around for a couple hundred years.
Okay.
So I think maybe like the early waves of colonization were maybe done with portals, and then eventually they were like, this is too difficult. And so spaceships have been around long enough to replace portal magic, and that's kind of one of the griefs of this master wizard, because that's his specialty. He's a portal mancer, and so he sort of has been kind of shunted off to the side, and his expertise is no longer relevant. But like things like the data stream, so that's like sort of the equivalent of the internet, is fairly new, maybe within the last couple of decades. And then the introduction of the androids is very new. That's something that's happening right during the course of the book.
And is the technology push also driven by commerce? Because you don't need magic to operate a spaceship. You need to buy whatever is powering the spaceship. So that opens up lots of commerce, and you don't have to be a wizard to have the materials that one needs to run spaceship.
Exactly. So I don't go too deep into like how the spaceships actually work. It's sort of, in my mind, sort of beyond the scope of the story that I'm trying to tell.
Right.
But there is.
I'm just curious because magic and technology are usually like at odds with each other.
Yeah. So that certainly could be the case. But what is definitely happening is this new android technology is replacing work, both magical and non-magical.
And what's driving that? Do people want to lay around and do nothing.
I mean, I think it's just ease and convenience, right? There's this new way to do things that
Or is it like novelty?
could be both. I mean, the androids are very expensive, so it's something that's
Right.
only accessible to what would be the equivalent of corporations or
Right.
the elite.
Right.
No problem for the master wizard in this book because he's fabulously wealthy. But
how is he? I guess he earned his wealth before spaceships came around, so I guess he's several hundred years old.
So that is the other part.
Or before they became the standard.
Yeah. So I mean, he's been the master wizard and had whatever access to power for decades. And it also becomes clear through the course of the book that he is using magic to extend his own lifespan. So he is unnaturally old. So he's been around for a long, long time. And so whatever, I don't make it clear, but whatever investments or whatever access to wealth he's been able to hoard for decades.
Wow. That's wild.
It is wild.
So the android, like how is it like full human intelligence or is it like childlike intelligence?
It starts off where it's a pretty simple intelligence, but it does say that it has the capacity to learn new things. And it also has a connection to the data stream. So anytime it needs to learn something new, it can access whatever relevant documents it's able to access and incorporate new information. So it starts off fairly childlike, fairly innocent, and makes the classic blunder of misunderstandings. But then as the android learns and progresses, is able to incorporate new information, is able to learn and grow, and sort of a really, it has really specific knowledge about some things and then has absolutely no knowledge about other things. But definitely grows and develops through the course of the book.
And it gets broken at some point in the book. Is that early on, or since that's like
it is the title of the book, and that was maybe a mistake that I made. I've gotten more than one review that says like the title of the book doesn't happen until 2/3 of the way through the novel. So just like have that expectation. I just thought it was a great title, and I stand by it. But it's not. It's certainly not the inciting incident. It's definitely something that it's more about climax that happens towards the end as a conspiring of many factors that have been coming together for months and months.
Okay.
So I'll leave that one a little bit vague for people to discover as they read.
And so apparently there's an ominous presence lurking in the woods.
Yes.
What's that about?
Going in there. And so Ninienne, obviously she's interested in creatures. She wants to know and like learn, but there's sort of this local legend about something called the Night Stalker that only comes out at night. And as you might imagine, she does eventually encounter the Night Stalker and work to unravel the mystery of the Night Stalker. So lots of mysteries going on the Shadow Moon.
So it's interesting. So would you say it's more like a fantasy sci-fi mashup mystery book?
With some Western elements too, yeah.
What are the Western elements?
So the way that I describe the town, Black Gulch, is very much it's sort of set up as a Western town. There's a saloon and there are farmers, and when I do the voice of the townspeople in the book, it's kind of a drawl, and I just because if there was this sort of this sense that happened as I was writing the book. It's like, if I've already got fantasy and I've already got sci-fi, it sort of felt like there was this invitation for this greater mashup and this greater collage. So yes, there's mystery elements and there's a little bit of thriller and there's a dash of romance, and then there's this sort of whole Western thing going on about this town, this rundown, abandoned town, and its failed industry. Sometimes I think about it as maybe if Douglas Adams had been commissioned to write a Harry Potter Firefly mashup, it's kind of how I think of the book.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And then so where did you get the idea for all this?
Well, I love science fantasy, the genre, the mashup genre.
Yeah.
There's just something about the interplay between the technology and the magic that sort of opens up this really interesting space for all these different things to happen. And so that's the genre that I talk about on my channel. And I had written a previous novel that I will probably have to rework and re-release. But I was thinking about as I was sitting down to write this novel, I was like, what's like the simplest, easiest way that I can get to science fantasy? What's like the core nugget? And so I was like, what if I just took a wizard and an android and mash them together, and then I spun the world out kind of from that center.
Okay.
So it's like, we're gonna have a wizard, and we're gonna have an android, and we're gonna have some of this concern about AI coming to replace people, and spun out the world and answered all the questions based on that core idea.
Cool.
So,
cool.
yeah.
Since that's interesting that it's about AI and people's fears of it taking over.
Yeah. And so then the other part of that is, as I was planning this book about artificial intelligence and magic, I thought, wouldn't it be really interesting if I incorporated artificial intelligence and magic? I used a tarot deck in the sort of the writing of the book. So I did use AI tools to generate parts of the book and to generate ideas. And then I also used a tarot deck, which is my stand-in for magic. I have a tarot deck that I would draw a card and get inspiration, or ask a question, and do a spread of like, okay, what's going on with this character, and kind of interpret these images. Because
Wait, how do you interpret? So you pull out the card. Let's say it's a death card, and you're like, okay, this person has to die, or you're like, wonder what else this card can mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's always
that kind of how that.
It's always up to your interpretation. And so the other part of this tarot deck, and maybe I can grab it.
Because we'll come back to the AI because that's interesting too. Yeah. But I've not heard. I've heard people use tarot card decks for writing, and your first person come on the podcast and said they've done this. So you need to explain.
So it's actually a patchwork tarot deck. So as you can see, if you're able to,
what does that mean?
It means all of these cards are from different decks.
Oh, so, and why is that? Like, you liked the art, or it speaks to you in some way?
Yeah, and the other thing
wait. So you bought multiple tarot decks and sorted through them to find the cards you like, or to build your own deck?
I am a member. So there's two answers to this question. One is, there is a pre-built deck called the Alleyman's Tarot, which is it's a patchwork deck in the box. So you pull it out, and these cards already have been licensed from other decks. So it's kind of gets you started. But then I'm also a member of a community that trades individual tarot cards in order to facilitate. So I did have like one or two decks that I was willing to split up, and I've been able to trade those out for cards from other decks. So I don't have to buy all these decks. It's and it's a great community. It's so much fun, and people send all sorts of stuff, and people are turning cereal boxes into tarot cards and making their own tarot cards and drawing their own. And so I've got a bunch of weird stuff. But anyway, the reason that I like the patchwork tarot deck over just a traditional deck is because it has so many different styles, and it has so many different ideas. If you get like a normal deck, it usually has a theme, and it's sort of all centered around that theme. And if I was writing a book, say I was writing a mermaid book, a mermaid tarot might be really good for that. But since I'm writing this mashup book, a mashup deck seems to make even more sense.
Okay,
so it can bring in
fascinating.
A lot of different ideas. And then to answer your previous, we unpacked a nested question here. To answer your previous question, so the question that I most asked the tarot deck was, like, what's driving this character? What's motivating this character? And I would draw, usually two cards, and then look at the images on those cards and try to interpret them. So, for example, actually really early on, when I was developing ideas for the book, and I was thinking about Ninienne, the main character, and I hadn't decided yet what she was studying, like what was her course of study. And I hadn't decided that she had a familiar yet, but I drew two cards, and one of them had a frog on it, and one of them had a dog on it. And I was like, oh, okay, so something about animals, something about creatures. Okay, maybe she's like a magical veterinarian. And then these images also inspire this idea of like, oh, okay, and then she has this companion who's part frog and part dog. So it ended up answering my question, then also giving me additional information and inspiration that I was able then to weave into the book.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. that's kind of blowing my mind a little bit.
So if you're interested
in a good way,
yeah. So this kind of thing is something. So I have a YouTube channel. It's called The Ragamancers, and I do what's called oracular storytelling, just like this. So I, tell stories using dice or cards or other inspirational tools, and I have an ongoing series that I've been doing for years now, with all sorts of characters, and it's interwoven. And this is how I do it. I don't have any ideas going in, and as I need an idea, I'll draw the appropriate card or use the appropriate tool. I use a lot of role-playing games as sort of a structure. So there's a lot of dice rolling and, saying, oh, this character totally fails at what they just did. So this is something that I've been doing for years, and it seemed like a natural thing to incorporate into my novel writing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
And then to go back to
the AI.
Yeah. Anything more to say on the tarot cards before we go back to the AI? Because I know that can be there's quite a lot with that.
That could be a whole hour on itself, but we have other things to talk about. So yeah, and then again, in this idea of like, this is a novel about magic and technology sort of coming together in the conflict, or whatever happens when those two things intersect. I thought I'll also explore these new AI tools and figure out some ways that I can incorporate them into my process. And I go into length and describe exactly how I use them. At the back of the book, I have something called the statement of tools, because I feel like people have a lot of questions about it, and I wanted to be perfectly clear about how they were used. At the end of the day, the book is 97% human generated. Like, I wrote almost the entire book, but there are passages that I did have the first draft written by AI. And then, of course, because it doesn't get it perfect, we're not there yet. It's still just like any first draft. Even if I had written the first draft, I would have to go back and edit it and change things and incorporate things that I discover from elsewhere. So there was like a thematic reason to use it, and then also just like a practical reason of like, how useful are these tools? How can I incorporate them into my process? And yeah, so and then there's also just like the easy thing of like, if you need an idea and you're stuck, and you don't want to generate like a whole paragraph or a whole scene, when I was thinking about the Wizard's Workshop, I was like, okay, I want to describe this in detail. Okay, ChatGPT, give me a list of 20 things you might find in a Wizard's Workshop, and then I could go through that list and pick a few, or one of them might inspire, like, well, that doesn't work, but it might inspire a different idea. So in the same way that the tarot cards, you draw a card and it inspires an idea that may or may not be related to that specific card. Same thing, the ChatGPT can act as sort of an oracle to inspire an idea that comes from you. So
that's really neat.
Yeah.
So you generated it and then you rewrote it, edited it. So it's not. Yeah. Okay.
No.
Cool.
And I do know like some writers are trying to like optimize and like try to get these machines to like write as much as possible, so the author has to do as little as possible.
That just feels like too much labor.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of a different project. At the end of the day, I'm still a writer, and so I enjoy the process of working with the words. But sometimes I think, like all writers, I get stuck and I need an idea and I want to keep moving. And so whether that's generating an idea,
because the deadlines don't stop just because your brain does, just because you're staring at a blank screen, like, how did we get here? Why did the character do that? Where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Just because you don't know doesn't mean the deadline changes. It's not polite like that.
And I will say, even when I was generating text, I would say maybe 60% of the time, it just was not useful at all. But what it did do, being able to see something, instead of looking at a blank page, look at something, I'd be like, no, that's not right. And that would help me lead to, so what is right? And that would help me get back into it. So even if the text itself wasn't useful, the process of just seeing something that wasn't working helped me get back into the writing, get back into that flow.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, and I know that there's like a lot of controversy around these tools, and I've definitely gotten some bad reviews. Actually, I've gotten some good reviews like, hey, great, engaging read. I recommend it. He used AI, 1 star, which feels a bit unfair to me, but I'll take the review. And so I acknowledge that there's a lot of controversy and kind of fear and anxiety around these tools. And so I wanted to explore them and be transparent about the way that I use them in order to kind of like move the conversation a little bit forward. Because I think right now, sort of the fear is, you push a button and a novel comes out. And the technology is certainly not there, but there are ways that authors can use it to their own advantage and avoid that blank screen. And whatever you have trouble with, if you have trouble with dialogue, if you have trouble with description, if you have trouble with backstory, like there's going to be a way for you to use these tools to help with whatever part is hard for you. And so I see them as a way that can assist authors make the hard parts of writing, whatever that is, or marketing. Marketing is often a hard part for writers as well. Whatever part of the process is difficult for you, I think there's a way that you can use these tools to make the process easier, so that you can focus on the fun parts and make the process more fun and more joyful.
And that's what we all want, is to
Right.
have more fun while writing.
Right.
And when that deadline is staring you in the face, it can get very stressful, and like the ideas can just sometimes fly out of your head and wander away without you, and you're like, wait, I need you.
So
so that's something interesting to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say, if someone is adamant, totally against it, that's fine. But for
that's
people who
their
are kind of in the
decision.
middle, I'm not saying all authors have to use AI. No. Like, it's still open to you. I think for people in the middle who are sort of curious about it, I would say, try it out. Next time you get stuck, open ChatGPT, explain, what the scenario is and what you might need help with, and just see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, the tools are there, and like I said, people are using them. Like why not?
Yeah.
Although I say that, and then I stare at the white screen, the white page for like an hour. That was me last night, and I'm like, but if this was at work, I totally would have opened ChatGPT, because you can't not produce that report that someone asked you for, because you can't think of what to write. It is still due at 4:00, and whether or not you can figure out how to phrase things in it doesn't matter. So in that instance, I would use it, because I'd be like, oh God, I've got the clock is running out. But when writing a book, I would totally, I have to try and be better about that, and remember that ChatGPT isn't just for work. If I need an idea, I can talk to the because how many authors out there, or just anybody, you don't always have people to talk to your ideas through, and you don't even have to ask ChatGPT to generate any content. You can just, that's what I do sometimes with work things. I was trying, somebody sent me this thing, and it was very technical, and it was it sounded like they tried to use as many $50 words as possible in the thing, and I was like, I don't think you could use these words in that context, and I'm trying to figure out how to make this understandable. And on the Teams chat, I'm like, is that right? Did you have that write up ready? And I'm like, no, I don't really understand what the dude, I think I know what he's trying to say. And I was at one point, I was like, what, I need ChatGPT to help me with this, because I'm getting hit with requests and stuff, and I just need this to be human understandable, because what was submitted to me was not human understandable by anybody outside that person's mind. So it's the tools are there, and why not play with them?
Absolutely.
I'm not rambling.
No, not at all.
I'm not anti progress. I don't think it's smart to be, because it's going to happen. I mean, all the big companies want it. And it can be with work stuff. It can be stress relieving to pop open ChatGPT and tell it what you're having a problem with and trying to figure out how to word the thing, or what I think the boss is looking for, and having somebody who's not going to judge you, who doesn't actually work for the company, give you feedback on it. And sometimes it can get you past that block. So I can see how it would be useful in creative writing, and I need to remember that it exists outside of work.
Sometimes how I think about it, it's like a writing buddy who you can always text, and they'll always answer, even if it's 3 a.m. That you can text them, and their ideas aren't always great. Sometimes their ideas are kind of dumb, but they'll give you something. They'll give you something to work with. You can bounce any idea off of them. Exactly, they won't judge, and they'll give you something back. And sometimes it's useful, and sometimes it's less than useful.
But sometimes even the less than useful ideas are useful, because just
Yeah.
recognizing this is not what you wanted sometimes your brain can make that leap and be like, oh, this is what I actually need. Even just explaining the situation to it. Because like I was talking to a coworker of mine who's leaving the company, and he was saying that he didn't know, he's never worked for any other company, and it was just time for him to move on, and he didn't know. He's not listening to this podcast, so you all know I'm talking about it. So he didn't quite know where to go or what to do, and he hasn't applied, for jobs in 7 or 8 years. And so he just opened up ChatGPT and had, what he liked about the job, like what are some other, like there's so many, and I thought that is such a cool application to talk to an AI to try and figure out where to go next and how to achieve it. That can, like, there's so many people are so quick to paint them as being like a problem and evil and stealing things, like, but it can be so helpful too.
Well, like any tool, like you can use it for good, or you can use it for ill.
That's true.
We're not going to ban knives just because some people choose to stab other people with knives. Like, yes, people that happens, but also knives are useful for cutting meat and preparing food, and like how are you using the tool? And I think just right now it's so new, and there's lots of and I think there's also a lot of misunderstanding about how it works and how it was built. So
it's not going away. Like Microsoft and them are spending jillions on it. Away. And it's not just where I work, but like I hear it from like my brother, from my cousins and my friends, that like companies are like, there's these tools that exist and people are throwing money at them. They want people to use, they want their own coworkers to use them and get, if there's a benefit to be had from it, to get that benefit, which I think is pretty neat.
Yeah. And I definitely I don't think anything's getting replaced. If you look at other skills, if you look at other mediums, even the photograph did not replace the oil painting. We still have oil paintings. The digital art did not replace any of the things that came before. It just became its own new thing, and often sometimes increased the value of the the more traditional handmade things. And so I think there's still space if people don't want to use it. They want to write totally by hand, or even write on your typewriter, or write longhand in your notebook. Like I think there's still a place for that, and I think there's still going to be demand for that as things come forward. So I think it's just opening up new space for new creative kinds of things.
Because like a great story is a great story, and it doesn't matter if you typed it on a typewriter or if you typed it on your phone, which I do a lot of writing on my phone.
Well, and some people, some people dictate; they don't even type. They speak, and it's just whatever. And that's the other part. It's an accessibility thing. I've been
I didn't even think of that
from some authors who have wrist injuries, and they actually can't physically type. And so using AI to they can explain the idea to the AI and have the AI write it for them, as a it's just so they can get it out, so they can keep doing this thing that they love, even if they can't physically use the tool that they were used to using before.
I didn't even think of that. That's a good point.
So that's something that's definitely happening.
No, that's a really good point, because there are. And especially with dictation, like the reason I don't do it is because it needs so much cleanup, and it's so much harder on, because I get the wrist pain too, and it's so much harder on, it's so much more stressful on the wrist to go through and try and correct that than it is to just not dictate it while you're driving or whatever. Because you're if you're driving, you're concentrating on what's going on in front of you, not the fact that you said well 15 times, because you're driving and paying attention to cars on the road, and you can't remember the next thing that should happen in the story, because your attention is elsewhere. So when I do use the dictation, but now there's so many tools that I've heard can clean it up. I haven't tried that, but I want to.
It's much better at cleaning up that kind of thing. I use it for the closed caption transcripts on my channel.
Okay.
To edit the grammar and put in all the periods and the quotation marks, and it's not 100% yet, but it's pretty good.
Right. But even if it can get like you mostly the way there, like that's still like an incredible.
Yeah, it saves me so much time.
Yeah, especially just having it like punctuate things, because like who remembers to say punctuation when you're like driving?
No, no one does that.
Like that breaks the. I mean, I know that there are people who do a lot of dictating who've taught themselves how to do that, but I'm like, I don't know. Just feel like that would break the chain of thought that you have to like think about like how you punctuate this, because the way we speak and the way we write is so different. We tend to speak in fragments and run-ons, but we can't write like that. It would drive readers nuts.
No.
No, it's very neat.
Yeah.
I think we got off track. So
oh no, I mean, anyway.
I'm going to blame the tarot cards instead of AI.
Yeah, the woo has inserted, yes, into the conversation. But yeah, I mean, and so that was the conceit. You know, I'll write this book about technology and magic, using technology and magic. And,
that's pretty cool.
And be open with the process. The thing that I was not expecting, and maybe I should have been a little bit smarter about this, was the level of pushback and vitriol that I would get from the anti-AI crowd for that. And I've gotten several negative reviews just for using it.
I wouldn't worry about it, because like in the past, like, you know, you can get a negative review because another author is jealous that your debut did better than theirs. This actually happened to me. I did get a really negative review from a fellow fantasy author back in 2016. We both released our books. I didn't even know. I didn't know this person. And I found out who they were later. I didn't even know what was going on until like I went to grab a review. Like I was, you know, they needed a snippet of a review for something. And I went to go look at the reviews on my debut novel, which is Cursebreaker Enchanted, which came out in 2016. And it was, and like, I saw it and I was like, I knew who it was immediately because their Amazon, like their reader account, their, consumer account and their author account have the same name, and they're an author, same as mine. And I knew at that point, I knew that they were also writing, and I had shared some, you know, their book in my newsletter. And I was like, okay, this kind of hurts that you're being this sort of jealous and hateful. But like a whole bunch of people had like downvoted it, and like, I think that was at the time you could still comment on reviews. I didn't, but other readers like did. They were very unhappy that a fellow indie author wanted to tear me down just because I happened to write a popular trope, which is the chosen one, and they didn't. I just wrote it because I liked it at the time, and for no other reason than that. I didn't know that was gonna, you know, that people were gonna be into that. No, you don't know that when you're writing your first book. You don't really know much about marketing or what the market wants. That's not a thing you are thinking about.
No, trying to finish this project.
Yeah, and put it out there and then see what happens. So like my point, I think I lost my point. But my point was that like you get negative reviews because someone's having a bad day and you know, their Kindle screws up. Like I've seen reviews on books that were technical difficulties, not anything that had anything to do with the book. So like I would just ignore those negative reviews about AI, because not everybody's going to like everything. And like there's so many reasons why you could get a negative review, and like and only a few of those reasons are actually like valid.
So yeah, and that's kind of been my strategy now. I don't read the reviews, and my wife reads the reviews, and if there's a good one, she'll share it with me. that's good. How I'm moving forward. Yeah, I
don't have that. So. I have to read my own reviews. That's all right. That's right. Most of them are, you know, most people leave really nice reviews, and like critical reviews are good, like especially when they explain what because we're not perfect, and we do run it through editors, but our editors are not perfect either, and like we're dealing, you know, we're only able to afford, you know, certain editors, and they may or may not, you know, some editors are line edits, they don't do content, and like I'm like, you know, I'm not saying that critical reviews are bad. They're good as long as they're written like with a good intent. Like they're not written just because you have an agenda and you want to tear something down. You know, because that's been an issue where people like to leave negative reviews on books that they've never even read. Like I've heard about it on TikTok and I've seen it on Goodreads. So just urge anybody listening, don't do that. Like if you genuinely don't like a book, like you can leave a review. Just remember that a human being is reading that, and they may have spent like thousands of hours writing that book, and the only available editors or help that they were able to get may not have been right for that book or for their writing style.
Yeah.
And honestly, so maybe like don't be mean in the review, be constructive, so that they can, so they know that, okay, maybe I need a different type of editing, or maybe this is something that I need to look at in my next book to make sure I don't make this mistake. I just want to say that. I'm not saying don't leave reviews.
Oh no, please leave reviews. Just
no, please leave reviews. Just don't be mean.
Because even if you don't like the book, if you're constructive, that can be helpful to other people looking at, not only to the author, but also to other people looking at the book who, if they mention something that they didn't like, but this other reader likes, there's like, oh, it's got this trope or it's got this thing, that can be helpful and informative to another reader.
Yes. So, I have a story about that because I bought a 20-book series based on a 1-star review. I'm not kidding. I bought all 20 books based on this 1-star review. It was for the Undying Mercenary series. The first book was on sale on Audible, and the blurb was like not doing it for me. I couldn't tell if it had my favorite tropes in it, the things that I really like to read. So I did what I always do, is I look at the critical reviews, because the 5-star reviews are just people gushing, and it's just their fans. They love everything this person does. Like I needed to hear from people who, like me, were trying this person for the first time or may not have read them before. That's what I was looking for. And this one person went on a tear. They weren't being mean. They were being, this book just didn't align with what they like, but everything they said in the 1-star review was exactly what I wanted to read. It was exactly the story I was looking for. And literally their 1-star review was just ticking every single box as I'm reading. It was like, there are dinosaurs, they fight dinosaurs. And like, it had all the military tropes that I love. So I just bought the entire series and I've never looked back. I love the series so much.
That's so great. If you're gonna leave a poor review, at least be detailed. Put in as many details as you can so that other people can see what's in there.
Yeah, it's not the only time that I bought a series of books based off a 1-star review. So don't be me, but be constructive, because the thing you don't like might be the thing that I really love, and I need you to tell me so that I know that I should buy this series. Because sometimes the blurb just ain't doing it for me.
Right.
And that's not anybody's fault. Like, even because Undying Mercenary series is published by like one of the big traditional publishers.
Oh, really?
And the blurbs are kind of not so awesome, at least in my opinion. I don't know. They don't do it for me. So I'm not the only one that has bought that series based on negative reviews. So it's not the greatest blurb on there, because a lot happens in the book. There's a lot of it's very character driven, and a lot of all the characters' motivations and stuff completely conflict with each other. So and they still have to try to work together to get stuff done, even though sometimes they hate each other.
Oh, okay.
So it's hard to summarize something like that when, know.
And it sounds like there's also a lot going on if there's dinosaurs.
Well, in every book they go to a different. The Legion is sent to a different planet, and they have to deal with whatever sentient life is there and whatever the mission is. And sometimes what they're told is the mission is not actually the mission, and they spend portions of the book trying to figure out what it is the Galactic Empire is trying to do. What is their plan? What are we supposed to do? And sometimes the answer is they're just supposed to be cannon fodder, but they don't want to tell. But their higher ups don't want to tell them that, because they're Undying Mercenaries. They have flesh printing machines, so if you get hurt, they just kill you and then recycle you, and they pop you out. They download your consciousness into a new copy of you, and there you go, and send you out to get killed again.
You're selling me on this.
Human life is pretty cheap in there, and it's interesting. Yeah, it's a very interesting series.
Wow.
But like I said, like the blurb just wasn't doing it for me, and but I I read the review, I read the first book, and I loved it, and I got the rest of them. I've never looked back. It's for me, it hits all the boxes. I really enjoy it, the narration and the characters. And and we're not here to talk about. I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop because it's one of my favorite series, and we're gonna come back to. Oops, I broke the wizard's android. Is it a series? Because we haven't talked about this yet.
Not yet, but I am writing the second book right now. Yes. So,
is the series have like, cause some people like know when they, you know, that, okay, this is just going to be a trilogy, or this is going to go for however long the characters have stories for me to tell.
Yeah. So I'll say it's at least a trilogy. But if I find like I hit something and, you know, I have more Ninienne has more stories that I want to tell, it could definitely extend. But right now I'm looking at, it's kind of hard to think about more than 3 books at once.
Yeah.
But at least a trilogy. We'll say that.
That's okay. And then is this like a world that you want to keep writing in, or do you have other worlds that are waiting for some page time?
The universe that is established is called the 12,000 Worlds. And my intention with that is, even if I move on to another series, it will still be set in this same universe.
Okay.
So I made the universe broad and big and flexible to be able to accommodate all sorts of different stories. So even if this series ends, there will be other worlds to explore and other characters in this same interconnected universe.
No, that's cool. That's cool. Because some people have like different universes that they want to write about, and I don't understand that, because I have the one world that I write about, and that's it. I can't imagine not setting the story in that world, and having the main characters of whatever the new series is not interact with all the other main characters and have all sorts of drama and mayhem with that.
It's a whole interconnect. Yeah, it's a whole thing. Why have to start over when you can, you know, reuse something that you've already put so much time and effort into?
And there's always new corners to explore.
Exactly. You make it big enough, make it vast enough that you can always push into something new.
That's very true. And wow, we've been at this for almost an hour. Not including the excerpt, because I haven't heard it yet, so I don't know how long it is.
It's a longer one. It might be like 25 minutes. So
that's fine. Yeah, because I'm inserting it afterwards. At this point in the conversation, I haven't heard it yet, so I don't know how long it is. So all time references are based on not having the excerpt in here. But the final version that you're listening to right now will have the excerpt.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Is there anything else you want to say about Oops, I Broke the Wizard's Android?
I mean, it's available on all major platforms, and it's also available direct from my website. That's ragamancers.com. There's the ebook, there's the audiobook that I narrated, and then there is the paperback. And if you order directly from me, you will get a special tarot card.
Is it from the deck that you used to write it?
It is not. It's a special tarot card that I had illustrated, and it's got the Wizard's Tower on it.
Cool.
So this is just a special giveaway, only available from my website.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And if you don't use tarot, it's a great bookmark.
I love that. Dual purpose.
Yeah.
That's very cool. And what is in tarot? What is the Tower card?
So the Tower is...
Does it come with an explanation for those who are like, think tarot is cool, but don't actually know anything about it?
This one does not. It's just an image, and I assume that if they read the book, then they would associate their memories and experiences. You know, if they were to use this card in a patchwork deck, then they would just think about, the Tower in this book.
Okay.
But traditionally, the Tower is usually shown being struck by lightning and it's being destroyed. It's a card of, clearing the way, getting rid of old stuff. But this Tower is perfectly intact, at least for now. Maybe read the book all the way through the end to see what happens to the Tower. Minor spoiler.
That's really cool. That's really neat that it comes with a tarot card. I mean, you can't send it with an AI, so I guess the card.
Yeah, there's something I could do there. There's no promo there. But
No,
I'd have
that's
to
really
think about that one.
Thank you for coming on the podcast and talking with us today
Absolutely.
about Oops, I Broke the Wizard's Android. We've been hearing from Royce Roeswood, and I've been your host, Melinda Kucsera. And yeah, all the links will be in the show notes in the description, as well as the link to the pre-launch of my new Kickstarter, which is coming. I don't think it's going to happen until next year. My father passed away early in September, and there's just been a lot of stuff with that, like helping my mom. So definitely follow it if you want to get the illustrated version of Robin of Larkspur's books and follow her adventure to save her daughter. So thank you very much. Have a great day and a great night. And I promise that I'll do a catch-up episode soon about everything that's going on, but I just don't have the bandwidth right now with everything with my dad, so I should be patient. There will be some more interviews. We've got some great guests coming up. So, but I promise that I'll do just a chat, you and me, listeners, soon. Thank you so much. Have a great day and a great night wherever you are.